How could a thriving era suddenly turn to ashes in just a few seasons? Over 200 years ago, the Mediterranean and Near East were the heart of an ancient globalized region, where mighty empires like Egypt, the Hittites, Minoans, and Babylonians flourished. But in 1177 BCE, everything collapsed. Cities burned, languages vanished, and iron gradually replaced bronze. Civilization entered a dark age that lasted for centuries. What happened? What thirst drained the life from these dynasties? To understand it all, we must turn back time to the beginning. As the name suggests, the Bronze Age was when humans first harnessed this material to shape their world. With increasingly refined smelting and metallurgy skills, ancient people learned to mix copper with tin or arsenic to create a harder alloy, later known as bronze. This durable, sharp, and flexible material quickly replaced stone in weapons, tools, household items, and even jewelry. Archaeological evidence shows that the Fertile Crescent, the cradle of Mesopotamian civilization, was the birthplace of metallurgy. From there, bronze-making techniques spread across the Middle East, the Mediterranean, and beyond, transforming how humans evolved. From nomadic hunting and gathering, humanity shifted to settled agriculture. Large urban centers emerged, social hierarchies grew more complex, and the first writing systems were born. Bronze became more than a material, it symbolized technological and intellectual progress. As demand surged, mining, refining, and trade networks flourished. This glorious age also gave rise to many historical wonders. The towering pyramids of Giza in Egypt, the majestic Karnak temples spanning 3 dynasties, and the wheel and cuneiform script emerging in Uruk-era Mesopotamia. Amid this rapid development, the first multi-ethnic political empire, the Kassites, was born, soon followed by other civilizations: Assyria in Mesopotamia, Egypt's New Kingdom, Babylon, the Hittite Empire in Anatolia, Mycenaean Greece, and the Minoans on Crete. But that golden light didn't last. Around 1200 BCE, the Bronze Age entered a swift decline. Within decades, nearly everything collapsed. Only Egypt remained, and even it was left exhausted and weakened. What pushed the world to this brink? The first clues of this chaotic end came from a coastal archaeological site in modern-day Syria. There, a clay tablet was found, a letter from the king of Ugarit to the Empire of Cyprus. It described enemy forces invading, burning cities, and ravaging the land. Ugarit's army and chariots were hundreds of miles away, leaving the kingdom defenseless. A final message from the realm recorded its tragic state: the military shattered, cities destroyed, food supplies burned, and crops turned to ash amid brutal chaos. And Ugarit wasn't alone. Around the same time, Cyprus was also invaded. Western coastal cities were torched, while inland settlements were spared. The elite tried to bury their treasures, hoping to return one day, but that day never came. Greece fared no better. The Mycenaeans had long suffered internal unrest. Ruins show signs of massive fires, arrows, and weapons, painting a clear picture of fierce battles where defenders ultimately lost. Some palaces were burned from within, suggesting uprisings that overthrew local rulers. Elsewhere, cities were abandoned due to famine, natural disasters, or both. Anatolia, homeland of the Hittites, suffered even worse. Archaeology shows that nearly every major city was destroyed, especially along the coasts. The devastation was nearly total. For a long time, this sudden, widespread collapse remained a mystery. Historians knew it happened, but no one could explain how or why. Then, in the late 19th century, the sands of Egypt revealed shocking clues that upended all previous theories. In the Temple of Medinet Habu, a carved stone stele commissioned by Pharaoh Ramses III described waves of invasions by foreign armies, landing on Egypt's shores over a 30-year span. Under their assault, everything was flattened and scattered in chaos. No nation could withstand their weapons. Egyptian records offered vague hints about the identity of these shadowy invaders. More than 3,000 years later, historians gave a name to that mysterious invading force: the Sea Peoples. They didn't come from a single nation, but were a scattered coalition of various communities spread across the Mediterranean, from Sicily and Sardinia to Crete and the Aegean coast. Some groups originated even farther west. These people, united under a loose alliance, swept through ancient civilizations in a wave of fire and despair. Their clothing was just as diverse. Some wore feathered helmets, others horned caps, a few covered their heads with scraps of leather. There were warriors in short kilts like those of Scotland, and others in long tunics down to the knees. What united these wanderers was the drive to abandon their old lands. They didn't just arrive with swords and shields. They brought wives, children, possessions, and beliefs. All boarded massive ships moving toward new lands like a tidal wave. On their journey across the Mediterranean and into Mesopotamia, few powers could withstand the sea peoples. But what made them so unstoppable? The answer lies in a symbol that once defined glory and destruction across ancient battlefields: the chariot. Two-wheeled vehicles pulled by horses. Initially, they were swift transport for nobles and lords, but over time, they became the backbone of every army from Babylon and the Hittites to Assyria and Egypt. Standard chariots of the era had 2 horses and 2 soldiers, one steering, the other firing deadly arrows. The horses were carefully bred and trained for speed and agility. At full capacity, they could outrun infantry by double. Meanwhile, the archer used a compact composite bow, short but powerful, capable of long-range and armor-piercing shots. On the battlefield, chariots combined speed, precision, and firepower. No other vehicle could match them. To compare, when the warship SMS Dreadnought launched in 1906, it instantly rendered every other navy obsolete. It was faster, stronger, and deadlier, just like chariots once dominated ancient warfare. But glory came at a steep cost. Breeding horses, training soldiers, crafting gear, all drained national resources. Horses required selective breeding and lifelong training, and only certain regions could produce suitable stock. Weapons and armor for charioteers couldn't be mass-produced. Each piece demanded meticulous craftsmanship. Losing a single chariot wasn't just material loss. It was a blow to the entire formation. That's why armies deployed infantry alongside chariots, to shield, support, break enemy lines, or defend the vehicles when surrounded. Yet when the whirlwind of the sea peoples hit the shores, the once supreme symbol of power became a relic of despair. Unlike ancient empires that relied on chariots and elite escorts, the sea peoples entered battle barefoot, wielding sharp swords. They carried lightweight weapons, unconventional tactics, and an unquenchable fire. Instead of tight formations like Western Asian armies, they scattered, broke traditions, and infiltrated unpredictably. Their style was a declaration of war against every classical formula. They weren't slow or rigid, they were mobile waves that shattered every defense. Small units struck weak points, cut off retreats, and appeared like lightning on the battlefield. Their guerrilla style made chariots, once superior to infantry, clumsy and vulnerable. Imagine a lone chariot in a field, surrounded by dozens of shadowy figures from all directions. No escape, no turning back. The chariot became easy prey in a trap laid long before. When the sea people's blades struck, wooden wheels splintered like dry twigs. Defenders tried forming spear walls, but were pierced from behind. Formations broke apart, and death followed in hopeless waves. Egypt was the last fortress still standing. But its eastern neighbors, northern allies, and western powers had all fallen to the sea peoples. At Medinet Habu, a colossal battle was carved into stone. The pharaoh commanded from his chariot, flanked by spearmen and backed by archers. But the focus wasn't the wheels, it was the human barricades, piles of arrows, and readiness to shoot anyone crossing the river. Instead of parading chariots, Egypt relied on archers and fortified positions. Every soldier was deployed. No gaps, no absences. Every inch of riverbank was a trap waiting for invaders. The final scene shows sea peoples bound and led away by Egyptian troops. Nearby, corpses lie beneath the pharaoh's feet, a message carved in stone to warn future generations. Of course, this was a victory tale written by the victors. Looking at the aftermath, no one can deny that the Sea Peoples were defeated at the Nile Delta. Though Egypt claimed victory, the cost was immense: manpower losses, depleted resources. From that moment on, the land of the pharaohs slid from its superpower status, becoming a shadow of its former golden age. But this decline couldn't be blamed solely on mysterious invaders from the sea. Behind it was a chain reaction of collapses, beginning with the breakdown of continental trade networks. This silent yet devastating unraveling became the key for modern scholars to trace the true cause. And the evidence they found not only challenged conventional wisdom, it forced us to rethink how the ancient world functioned. All ancient civilizations depended on a core material for survival: bronze alloy. Without it, weapons became brittle, tools broke easily, and technological foundations quickly deteriorated. To make bronze, one needed to mix 90% pure copper with 10% refined tin, a simple ratio, but one that demanded a highly stable supply chain. Copper wasn't rare, but extracting it wasn't easy, especially with primitive techniques. While many kingdoms had their own mines, only the island of Cyprus truly served as the metallic heart of the region. Rich in copper ore, it allowed direct extraction from the earth. This turned Cyprus into an economic powerhouse and a critical link in the vast material exchange network. Tin, however, was a different story. Hard to find and extremely scarce. So rare, in fact, that it could determine the fate of entire civilizations. A small mine in Anatolia was tightly controlled by the Hittites, but its reserves were too limited for long-term supply. Beyond that, almost no land in the region produced this precious metal. The largest tin source at the time lay far to the east, in what is now Afghanistan, thousands of miles across mountains and deserts. The journey from there to Cyprus was perilous: bandits, wars, and harsh terrain. Yet the profits were so great that merchants risked everything to transport each shipment westward. Other mining sites existed, but none were large enough to sustain the bronze-dependent world. Only Cornwall, at the far western edge of Britain, had reserves comparable to Afghanistan. Sea voyages from there took an entire year, crossing icy waters and pirate-infested routes, sometimes just to trade for a few blocks of silvery ore. But if successful, the rewards were enough to make entire kingdoms stand tall among nations. This shows how even a minor disruption in tin distribution could collapse the entire metal industry like a sandcastle. Without bronze, the age itself would vanish. That's why many scholars believe the Sea Peoples' invasion was merely the final blow. What truly killed the Bronze Age civilizations was the destruction of global trade routes, halting weapon and tool production, and triggering the downfall of empires. It was a vicious cycle. Each attack by sea raiders disrupted commerce. Trade breakdown meant nations lost the resources needed to defend and recover. Widespread weakness left the ancient world vulnerable to the next wave of destruction. As Bronze Age powers crumbled one by one, the hope of revival sank deeper into darkness. But was that the whole story? Or were invisible forces quietly dragging empires to their doom? Even without the global trade shock, the region may have already been on the brink. Experts note that the Sea Peoples' migration coincided with a 50-year period of massive earthquakes across Western Asia. Archaeological evidence shows cities in Greece, Anatolia, the Levant, and Cyprus were devastated by seismic disasters. Among them, Greece seemed to suffer the worst, its landscape nearly unrecognizable. Only recently have things become clearer. Sediment samples and tree rings from northern Europe reveal signs of a severe climate crisis. This forced populations to migrate southward in search of survival. In the end, it was all part of a chain reaction. When nature raged, humanity fled, and proud civilizations collapsed before they could even understand what was happening. Shockingly, the eastern Mediterranean suffered even more. Ancient pollen samples from northern Syria show a 300-year drought began just before the Bronze Age collapsed. Conditions were even worse on Cyprus. Environmental changes were so extreme that rainfall couldn't support basic agriculture. And that, undoubtedly, was a disaster. It may explain why many cities were abandoned before the sea peoples even arrived. Similar patterns were found in the Levant and Anatolia. In Greece, evidence shows that over hundreds of years, plants evolved to adapt to arid conditions, like desert shrubs. Letters found in the city of Ugarit support this discovery. One message sent to the Ugarit Empire was a desperate plea for grain, ending with the line, "This is a matter of life and death." Another letter from nearby Mr read, "If you don't come immediately, we will all die. You will not see a single living soul in this land." This collapse wasn't a fatal strike from a mysterious force. It was the result of countless small fractures, accumulating and amplifying beyond repair. Unstable weather dried the soil, sowing the seeds of crop failure. The consequences spread into famine, driving populations into despair. Cities emptied, once bustling streets now echoed only with the wind through cold ruins. When food became scarce, conflict erupted within communities. Ruling classes lost control, while minority groups began to rise. Prosperous regions turned into abandoned ports, and at the peak of this chaos, nameless armies from the sea landed. Layer by layer, civilizations were swept away like dry leaves in a storm. No one had the strength to rise again, and no one remained to rebuild. 5 forces collided at once, bringing the glorious Bronze Age to an end.